So as you can see here, it comes with the light box and you get several different backgrounds. The one that I have in here is the white one, and it also comes with 5 others for a total of 6 different backgrounds: white, blue, black, green, red, and like a yellowish orange. And then if you look on top of the unit, you can see this particular unit has a single light strip and it has 20 LED light bulbs. And this type of a light box works extremely well if you want to use your phone or your tablet or even a larger digital SLR. But for your phone or tablet, it's quite simple. You could shoot right from the front, or you can see the top of the unit has a hole where you can just shoot down at the unit. And then here's a couple images that we're looking at that were taken using an iPod Touch. While you could do an outstanding job just using this one light strip that you see here, you could still use other light modifiers if you want to, like reflectors. So sometimes I may bring a reflector, like a silver mylar. One thing to keep in mind is that if you're going to be using a camera where you control your lens settings, such as your aperture and your shutter speed, is that the rules of depth of field and aperture will apply. So in other words, if you're going to be photographing something that has depth, like at an angle, like you see here, these pearls here, there's a beginning, there's a front, and then as it goes further on back, you can see it slowly goes out of focus. And you can control the degree of focus or your depth of field with your aperture. That is your lens opening. So if you look at the first one, you can see that it's sharp. And when I photograph something like this, I'll focus towards the front, and maybe not all the way front, but just a little bit back, because I'll still have my depth of field once I set my aperture to where I need it to be. So in other words, there was a section earlier in the course that really explains how your depth of field is controlled by your aperture. And if you're not quite sure about this, it's probably a good idea to go back and to watch that again, just so you fully understand this. And when you do, you can use this for all kinds, all the photography that you do, small products, portraits, landscapes, and so on. As an example, here we're looking at our first image. You can see that the front section is sharp. That's where we focused. And it goes pretty much way out of focus towards the back. Why is that? Because here I have the camera set all the way open at f2.8 is my aperture. And at 2.8, remember, we're getting very shallow depth of field. So you can see how the front is sharp and then it goes way out of focus as we go back further. So as I said earlier, aperture controls your depth of field. So what happens if we change our aperture from f2.8 and then here we're going to f10? It's not quite set to its smallest aperture, but look at the difference though. Here we have a lot more of the pearls that are in focus. That's because now we're using a smaller aperture, therefore we have greater depth of field. And watch what happens as I set my lens to f32, which is the smallest aperture that this lens had. And look at here, we can see, because of the great depth of field, we can see everything is pretty much in focus right here. And that might be something that you may want. So remember, aperture controls your depth of field. However, another thing that you have to watch for is that when you set your aperture all the way down to, say, f32 here, so it's a very, very small opening, there's a real good chance that the shutter speed that we need to get the proper exposure is going to be very, very slow. As an example, on the first image I showed you, remember the aperture was set to f2.8, and I was able to get 1/800th of a second. And at 1/800th of a second, it's relatively easy to handhold it and not get any camera movement. And as we look at our image where the aperture was set to f32, we have to set our shutter speed, whether you shoot manual or if it's done aperture priority, it's going to do it for you automatically. It's going to give you the proper speed. And in this case, look, we're at 1/6 of a second. that's probably going to be a lot slower than someone will be able to hand hold the camera and get a clear photograph. So what do? In a case like this, then very simply, you just put your camera on the tripod. And then here again, f32 at 1/6 of a second. Camera's on a tripod, it's steady. We make the exposure and there it is. It's a lot different than this image here where we had the aperture set to f2.8, even though we had an 800th of a second, which was easy, very easy to handhold that. So just to review, remember your aperture controls your depth of field. And the depth of field is the amount or the area that's going to be in focus. And use a tripod if you're going to be using a very, very small aperture. Small aperture means you're going to have a larger number like f32, f22, and so on. So by understanding how your aperture controls your depth of field, you'll know what you have to do to get everything in focus if that's what you want, or if you want to use selective focus where you want just a small section of your product to be in focus and everything else goes out of focus.